For the people out there who support the Democrats' open border, the people who think illegal immigration is not a real issue, I would like to invite you to the October 5th wake for Officer David Lee. Officer Lee was killed this week when an illegal immigrant named Ramon Chavez Rodriguez got all liquored up on tequila and took a siesta behind the wheel of his car while driving 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. Rodriguez broke the law when he entered the United States. He broke it twice more by driving without a license and ignoring a posted speed limit. Rodriguez was already on probation at the time of the crash after being convicted of domestic battery. And yet, he was still in the U.S. because we fail to jail criminals and deport illegals who break our laws. Officer Lee would be alive today if not for terrible leftist policies. And if my little off-color joke about the siesta offended you more than the actual death of Officer Lee, I'd like to remind you that you're part of the problem. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Hello, everyone. Okay, today we are going to be talking about three topics. We have a little bit about illegal immigration and crime. We're going to be talking about death row and capital punishment, and then credit card debt. But first, my favorite comment from last week comes from Shirley Finster 2247, who said, quote, "There was no actual assassination attempt. The MAGA world has fought hard for anyone and everyone to be able to carry guns everywhere they go, like the Wild West. This guy was carrying a gun. He happened to be on a golf course. He didn't even have a line of sight on Golfer Boy. It was just a MAGA exercising his rights." End quote. Shirley, I can't put my finger on it, but I feel you're being disingenuous. I feel like you don't actually mean what you're saying. I think you're using something that I had to look it up. I think it's called sarcasm. I believe that's what it's called. And I know that you don't actually think that because everything about that just seems ridiculous to me. I am as pro Second Amendment as you can be. I've gone over this multiple times. And while I'm all for people carrying guns, I think that there's a difference that almost anyone would acknowledge between carrying a pistol on your person in a concealed manner for personal protection and hiding in a bush waiting to waylay the former president with a long rifle. I don't think they're exactly the same thing. I don't think any Second Amendment lover like myself would think they're the same thing. I think you're being disingenuous, Shirley. Do better. Okay, on to topic number one. We went over this in the intro just a little bit, and it is a subject I had a hard time writing an intro for because it's hard to find humor in this subject. It is a terrible tragedy. Are you kidding me, Winnie? Look at this cat. She jumped up on the desk. Oh, now she's behind the computer. Can't even reach her. Yeah, get over here. Look at you. Winnie, we're recording right now. What are you doing? Yeah. All right, sorry, people. There's not a lot of humor in this subject. And it's difficult for me. I didn't know Officer Lee. I'm from St. Louis. I didn't know him. But he is a friend of a friend. I know people who were friends with him who are devastated. And not to mention his wife and children who are hurting in a way that most people will never be able to imagine. This is not an incident for humor, so that intro was pretty difficult to write. I'm going to describe in some detail here the incident, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. So for those of you who don't know, those of you outside St. Louis who are watching this, this was a big news story this week in St. Louis. Basically, it was rainy earlier this week, and there was a single vehicle crash on the highway. Officer Lee was there on scene. I guess he was there before either maybe there was no fire truck dispatched. I don't know how they do it in the city. In the county, when we get accidents on the highway, typically a fire truck is there to block for the officers until MoDOT gets there or until we establish that there's no person injured. So Officer Lee was there on a single vehicle crash. He was putting out cones for traffic to go around. Rodriguez was intoxicated, heavily intoxicated. He was driving 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, 18 miles over the speed limit. They clocked him. And he struck Officer Lee while he was putting cones out on the road. Officer Lee was taken to surgery at SLU, but he died. And he was 44 years old at the time of this incident. I actually had a friend who was in the SLU ER, coincidentally, just in the SLU ER, and saw Officer Lee come in and said it was just a tragedy. Just that he knew he was going to die before it was announced, and so had a little bit of an inside scoop as to the extent of his injuries, and needless to say, it was horrific. And it's unfortunate. Officer Lee is the 167th police officer in the St. Louis Police Department to die in the line of duty in the history of the department. This scumbag who hit Officer Lee and killed him, Rodriguez has been arrested. He's been charged. I was trying to look up this morning the actual charge that he was being charged with. I couldn't find it in any of the reporting, so I'm not sure if they announced it. I'm sure they did. I'd imagine it's some sort of manslaughter charge, but I'm not 100% sure. We'll see. Or vehicular manslaughter probably. I'm not 100% sure. But he did have a blood alcohol level of 0.10. This was taken 2 hours after the crash. So I believe the legal limit is 0.08. So he was over the legal limit. This is 2 hours after the crash. So I'm not 100% sure what it would have been, but I know I believe actually there's a formula that you can use to figure out how much your blood alcohol content will go down over hours. So I'm sure they'll be able to backdate that for 2 hours and figure out how much higher he actually was, because he is well over the limit even 2 hours after the crash. This piece of trash, Rodriguez, was already on probation for a domestic battery conviction he had back in 2022. I don't know the details of that case, but I think when I was reading, this could be a mistake, I believe it was a felony conviction that he had. I'm not 100% sure on that. It could have been a misdemeanor, but I think somewhere I read that it was actually a felony domestic battery conviction. I want to just say here, why? It's 2 years later. This guy has... Actually, hold on. Let's take a break here for 1 second. Let's go over something real quick, because this is a complicated subject I'm about to get into, and I feel like sometimes you need to lay the groundwork. There are currently millions of people who are in this country illegally. They come across the southern border, or they overstay their visas, which is a common way that people are in the United States illegally. And I don't know which one Rodriguez is. They have acknowledged that he is not a citizen of the United States. They have said his immigration status is not going to affect the outcome of this case, which is true. But let's talk about the millions of people who are here illegally. Everyone will acknowledge that most people, and let's take immigrant versus citizen away from it, most people in the world are not criminals. That's just the way it is. Most people do not walk around committing crimes on the daily. They do not murder or rape or steal or assault people. They're not doing these things, most people, most of the time. So that also applies to the immigrant population. There will be some who say that their very nature of being here is a crime. I do agree with that. But what I'm talking about is I'm talking about crimes against other people. I'm talking murders, robberies, rapes. The violent, assaulting, terrible crimes that we talk about when we actually are talking about crime. So most of the people who are here, the millions of people who are here illegally, they are here not to commit crimes, because most people don't commit crimes. And they're here to work. They're here to repatriate money back to their homes, or they're here because their families were threatened in some way and wherever they're from, and they're here. Okay. We can have a conversation about streamlining the immigration process. No one should break the law. You shouldn't come here illegally. We can have a conversation about streamlining the immigration process and making it better so that more people can come here who just want to work and want to contribute to the economy and don't want to take any help from the government. So no social services, no anything from the government. You come here just to work. We can have that conversation. One of the things we cannot do, though, is do this thing, and I see liberals do it, I see people on the left do it all the time, which is say things like, oh, well, the crime rate in the immigrant population is actually less than those of the natural-born citizens of the United States. This is false. It actually is not true. What they do is they use the immigration stats from forever ago, where it's this number. They'll say something like 11 million or 13 million. 13 million illegal immigrants. Here's the violent crime that they commit. Here's the average citizen. Their rate is per capita less than that of the American citizen, blah, blah, blah. They're using outdated numbers based on bad immigration data to make a point that is ridiculous in nature, because it's not about the immigrant population compared to the natural-born population of the United States. It's not about that. It is about the fact that one crime committed by an illegal immigrant is a crime that didn't need to happen because you could police the border and you choose not to. So Officer Lee dies. And you say, well, most police who are killed in the line of duty are not murdered by an illegal immigrant. And I'd say, that doesn't matter at all. This one was. He didn't need to die. You allowed this to happen with your terrible policies on criminal justice and immigration. Most illegals are here. They just want to work. That's just the way it is. Most people who are here, they don't want to commit crimes. But there is a subsection of people who are crossing the border, who are criminal in nature, who do not deserve to be in the United States, who are here for nefarious purposes. Most of the people who come across the border are here to work. How about the people who bring them across? They work for the cartel. They are in the business of trafficking humans. They are in the business of smuggling drugs. They are in the business of getting criminals and terrorists into the United States. These people are all by nature criminal. We have almost 200 people, actually, almost 200 people who have been apprehended on the terror watch list coming into the country illegally. Those are the ones who've been apprehended. What about the ones who weren't apprehended? All of the people who we have now, we've seen it, and you see a highlight of it on the news. When you point out the fact that gang members are coming across the southern border to come to the United States to commit violent crime, people will pretend that you're trying to paint Hispanics in a racist brush. That's not what I'm doing. I have just acknowledged that most of the people who come across the border are just hardworking people. And I'm not trying to say anything bad here, but you see those guys down at Home Depot who want to help you put up a roof? I got nothing against those guys. Those guys work hard. I've worked with some of those guys. Those guys work hard. This is nothing against them. I'm saying I don't think they should be here, except unless they want to go through the process. But I'm not saying anything morally, there's nothing morally corrupt about them. Those guys want to work. They're here to work. They're here to contribute. I get that. But you also have a subsection of people who come across the border who are criminal in nature. And what people do is they conflate the two things. And they say something like, this piece of trash that we have here, Rodriguez, this guy, they want to pretend that when I talk about this guy, this scumbag, that I'm painting with a broad brush and I'm talking about Mexicans or Puerto Ricans or whoever. I'm not. I'm talking about people who are criminal in nature. I don't care. If I had the option to deport a bunch of white people who commit crimes, I would do that too. I don't want to live around criminals. That's it. I don't care what color they are. And by not policing the southern border, you allow people into the country who you wouldn't if you just knew who they were. Because the guy who wants to come here and work or the woman who wants to come here and work, okay, that's fine. We can have a conversation about how many of them we should take in at a time and what that process should look like. But I'm open to the idea. I'm not anti-immigration. I am anti-people coming across the border who we don't know and we don't vet and who do not want to contribute. They want to take advantage of a system that is set up to allow them to thrive. This guy was arrested before. His immigration status was apparently reported. He had a hearing set for October. What does that mean? Oh, it's a hearing to figure out what we're going to do. Why do we need a hearing? You were arrested. You were convicted of a crime. Immediate deportation. That's it. There doesn't need to be a hearing about this. Why is the process so difficult to deport someone? Here's a simple law to pass. And if it's not already a law, explain to me why. You commit a crime. You go back to whatever country you're from. There you go. We don't need criminals in the United States. We have plenty of criminals in the United States. There's a population of 350 million people in the United States. Some of them are going to be criminal. That's just the way it is. I think we have my number here could be totally off, by the way. I think it's 1 million people. We have 1 million people in our prison population. So if you do that math, what is that? 0.3% of the United States population is in prison, somewhere around there. And we don't need more criminals. That's a lot of people. Even 1 million people in jail is a lot of people, even in a country of 350 million people. Let's do a quick, I'm curious here. Prison population in United States. I want to see if my number was accurate there. Mass incarceration, blah, blah, blah. All right, well, this is from I don't want this. This is from 2022. We don't want that. Here we go. Okay, December 31st, 2022, 1.2 million. All right, that's a pretty good guess. All right, I did pretty well. So 1.2 million people, that was a couple years ago. It's probably gone up. But, so anyway, but point is, we don't need more criminals. And when you talk about the border, these are the people we're talking about. We're talking about people like Ramon Chavez Rodriguez. That's who we're talking about. This guy, we don't need him here. What is he contributing except to the death and misery in the city of St. Louis? Nothing. I don't care what he does. I don't care if he's a nice guy outside of this. I don't care. It does not matter to me. You were convicted. First of all, you're convicted of domestic battery. You're probably a real piece of work. And I got nothing nice to say about him. And I don't care about anything else. You were convicted of a crime. Domestic battery. What does that mean? That means he was beating on a woman. That's what that means to me. I don't know. I don't know the details of the crime. Domestic battery, to me, means that you were beating on your woman. We don't need you here in the United States. Goodbye. Good riddance. Go home. We don't want you. Again, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about people like this who commit crimes. And the thing that will drive you nuts is how disingenuous people are. As if this policy of policing the border, of this policy of deporting people who want to commit crimes is somehow rooted in bigotry. It is such a small-minded and simplistic argument that you would say it almost doesn't need rebuttal. But unfortunately, people believe it's true. People will listen, by the way. People will listen to something that I say, like the intro to this story. There are going to be people out there who want to pretend that there is some sort of anti-Hispanic Hispanic sentiment in that. I made a joke about, I said the word siesta, tequila, I rolled the R on Rodriguez. Oh, he must just not like Hispanics. No, the point is, if you think that any policy that I would ever advocate or Republicans would advocate for is rooted in bigotry, it is a mirror that you're holding up to yourself. You see bigotry where you want to see bigotry, and there's none there. If Canadians, by the millions, were flooding into America, white, good-natured Canadian people who are known for their politeness, if they were flooding into America, I would say build a 40-foot wall on the northern border. That's what I would say. I don't care what color the person is coming across. I care that we know who they are, and I care that we know why they're here. That's it. That is it. This guy, this death, this tragedy, Officer David Lee would be alive today if it weren't for the terrible policies on the southern border implemented by the Democrats. And also, or by contrast, the terrible policies implemented by Democratic prosecutors in different states, in big blue cities like St. Louis. If we arrested people and we put them in jail when they committed crimes, this guy might have been in jail. He might have thought twice about breaking the law again. Instead, he got probation for beating on some woman. He's convicted of potentially a felony. It could have been a misdemeanor. Like I said, I don't remember. But he was convicted of a crime. You go to jail, straight to jail, all right? You don't come out. You don't pass go. You don't collect $200, straight to jail. And that's where we put people who commit crimes. And once you commit a crime and it turns out you're illegal, guess what? You should go to jail, and then we should deport you. Double whammy. That's what you get. Good riddance. Goodbye. We don't need you. That's, again, what we're going to say today. And there's nothing hateful about this. There's nothing. The only people I dislike are the people who take advantage of other people, the people who hurt other people. Those are the people I don't like. It doesn't matter if it's a white person, a brown person, a black person, an Asian person. I don't care who it is. If you hurt and take advantage of other people, if you commit crimes against the United States, and I'm not talking jaywalking, I'm not even talking speeding. If we wouldn't be having a conversation if someone gave him a ticket for driving without a license or driving 20 miles an hour over the speed limit. We're not talking about this guy. We're talking about someone who chose to drive intoxicated and murdered a police officer. That's what we're talking about. So I'm not talking about stupid, simple crimes like jaywalking. I'm talking serious, big boy crimes like murder. And there's nothing hateful about acknowledging the fact that we don't need people who are going to kill people in the United States. We don't need them. Go home. Go away. We don't need you. The people who want to work, like I was talking about, the people who want to come here and work, I welcome you. That's fine. There is an argument to be made about the limit of low-skilled wages and low-skilled labor that we need in the United States. That's not the conversation we're having right now. There's a limit to how much low-skilled labor could depress wages of low-skilled American labor. We can have that conversation. That's a fine conversation to have. It's a real conversation to have. But the idea that unchecked, unfettered immigration from the southern border has no net negative is a wild mischaracterization, misrepresentation, and a possible fantasy world that you live in where a bunch of people, everyone's good, and everything works out. That's not the way it works. It doesn't get it just because you want it that way. Grumble, grumble. All right. On to, that's it. That's all I got to say about that. Damn it. That's all I got to say about that. On to topic 2, capital punishment. Okay, so this one, again, that story and this story are somewhat local stories, and we're going to kind of go through this one a little quickly because I'm actually planning, I have an article I'm working on right now that's going to flush this out a little bit more, so I don't necessarily feel the need to say everything here right now. But this week, Missouri executed a man named Marcellus, and then he went by Khalifa Williams. And Williams was a man, he's been on death row for 20-something years. He was convicted of killing a former newspaper reporter named Leisha Gale during a burglary. Gale was stabbed 43 times with a kitchen knife taken from her home. Now, over the past 20 years, Williams has maintained his innocence, but he was convicted, and he was actually convicted while being in prison for a separate robbery. He got convicted, I believe it was for robbing a donut store, I think is what I read this morning. And while he was in jail, he also got convicted of this and then sentenced to death. Here's a couple interesting things about this case. There is no physical evidence that tied Williams to the crime. They did not have DNA from Williams. They had a couple bloody footprints that they never found an exact match on. The police had evidence, a lot of evidence, but the thing that actually got him convicted was a testimony of 2 people, his former girlfriend and a man that Williams shared a jail cell with, who both testified that Williams did it. The girlfriend said that she found the victim's purse in his car, or saw the victim's purse in his car, and that he was wearing a coat on an unseasonably warm day to cover up bloodstains on his clothes. And the guy who Williams bunked with in jail said that Williams actually confessed to him about the crime. Now, he's appealed this crime numerous times. The appeal process is really immaterial. It's not really what I want to talk about. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. No one agreed that there was enough evidence to overturn his conviction. So why are we talking about this guy who was killed? We're talking about it because, first of all, it's been big on social media, especially here because he's local, St. Louis. I know his son. His son was a professional boxer, and I know him a little bit. Not good friends, but I know him. This might surprise some of my regular listeners, but I am actually against the death penalty. It's one of those things that I have always been against. I do not support the death penalty. The idea of justice to me does not result in capital punishment. And there's a variety of reasons why. You'll hear people make a misguided argument, sometimes in a religious context. I believe actually in a religious context, you could justify capital punishment. I think there is a big case to be made in both the Jewish and Christian tradition for capital punishment being a fine way to deal out justice. My version of justice does not account for that today. It doesn't work, in my opinion. I do not believe the death penalty is a deterrent against more heinous crimes. Nowhere where the death penalty is accepted are crimes any less likely to be committed. I think my big problem with the death penalty is my mistrust of the state. I do not believe that I think the United States should be granted permission to execute its own citizens. I do not believe this. I don't think that governments have that right. There's a difference. We grant authority to the United States in the form of the police or the military. So the police, for example, they have the right to kill people in the line of duty. But there's a difference between what we're talking about with the police, where someone is actively committing a crime and the police have to respond with lethal force. than premeditated execution of a person that we've already apprehended. There's a difference between those two things, and it's a big no for me. I do not believe that the state should be given the right to kill people. I don't think it's a power we want to grant to the state because I mistrust the state. I do not think that the state should be the people to dole out death to its own citizens. Premeditated death. Even when the crime is heinous. And I know that there are some people who would disagree with me because here's why. Here's another reason why I disagree with that. If somebody hurt my family, I would want that person to be killed. This is retributive justice. We want retribution, and we look to take an eye for an eye. This is what we're looking for. This is not a good way for the state to think about justice. There are some people who commit crimes so heinous that they're going to be locked up for the rest of their lives. But that's not the role of the state in doling out justice, is not to punish people. It's really not the role. It's a misunderstanding of what the role is. The role is not to punish. The role is to keep the citizens safe by segregating off someone from society who has demonstrated they can't follow the rules, and also to rehabilitate people to try and get them down a better path to be productive. That's the role of justice in the United States. It's not actually to punish people. If it was to punish people, what we would do is we'd put a claw hammer in the hands of the victim's family, and we'd say, go to town, we'll hold them down for you. That's justice. That's an eye for an eye. That's retribution. We don't want retribution in our legal system. We want to keep people safe with our legal system, and we want to try and get criminals to behave in an orderly fashion. That is our goal. It's not punishment. It's a mistake. We punish people who do wrongdoing. This is part of it. But it's not the goal. The goal is not the punishment. Because if the goal was punishment, we would have no Eighth Amendment. The Eighth Amendment protects you against it protects you against cruel and unusual punishment. There we go. My goodness, I couldn't think of the phrase. So the Eighth Amendment protects you against cruel and unusual punishment. Why would we have that? Because the founders recognized that it's not the role of justice to inflict punishment. That's why we don't have torture. We don't send you to the dungeon where some guy's just going to whip you on the back every day for 5 years and then you're done. It doesn't make better citizens. It doesn't make people safer to torture people. And it's why we don't do it. And so I'm against this. I don't know. The particulars of this case, I'm not saying. They had some things happen in the case. I guess they tried to DNA test one of the murder weapons, and it came back with a profile of a male that didn't match Williams. And then I think it turned out to be somebody from the prosecutor's office of the original case who apparently handled the evidence without gloves after it was already tested, something like this. They mishandled evidence is really what it came down to. There was nothing that they found that proved Williams' innocence, but that's really not also the system of justice we live in. Anything what they call beyond a reasonable doubt, meaning that you are not allowed to have a doubt to convict somebody. So if something just casts, you're not 100% sure, you can't convict someone of a crime because that's what beyond a reasonable doubt means. So to me, you say, yeah, I don't know, reasonable doubt. In this case, maybe. There's no physical evidence. You have testimony from two people, both of whom are dead, one of which was a convict in jail, and the other one was a jilted ex. That's a rough one. Just the testimony of two people who are not related to each other, have no witness of the crime, don't really know anything, but just say what actually sounds like a little bit of a he said, she said. Well, that to me doesn't sound like enough to kill somebody over. Again, I don't know. I haven't gone into every detail of the case, but those seem to be what everyone says is the consensus, the main reasons why he was convicted. Which brings me to my last point as to why we should be skeptical of capital punishment. Let's grant for a second. Let's take this out of the case. Let's just say generic person. Generic man number one is convicted of a crime that he didn't do. This does happen. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but it has happened. We know it has happened. So you're convicted of a crime that you didn't do. You are sentenced to death, and then the state executes you. One person who this happens to is too many people. It is too big of a risk to take. Let's imagine for a second that Williams was innocent. I'm not saying he was. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying a bunch of appeals courts looked at the evidence and no one ever overturned it. So by all accounts, he was guilty. I don't know. I don't know. You don't know. That's the point. We had a trial. The trial went one way. No appeals court ever overturned it. We have to believe in the justice system the way that it works. However, let's grant for a second and just say that he was innocent. Let's say that he was innocent and that state just executed him. What does that say about the power of the state? What does that say about the government, that it would kill an innocent person? It doesn't speak well to the citizens of this country, nor to the government of this country. It's too many. It's too big of a risk for me to take. I think it's a mistake for us to do it. There's a bunch of arguments about money. Never, ever argue about money, how much it costs to put people in prison, and use that as a justification for killing them. Just realize that's a bad, morally flawed argument. Don't do it. Don't make it. So anyway, we're going to leave that there. Like I said, there's going to be an article. Look for it to come out later this week, hopefully, and it'll be more in-depth on the thoughts about capital punishment and a little bit more on the way I think about it. Okay, topic 3. Donald Trump. Donald Trump says a lot of things, okay? We all know this. We all know Donald Trump says a lot of stuff. And currently on the campaign trail, he has said that he wants to limit credit card interest to 10%. So credit cards cannot charge more than a 10% interest rate. There's a good applause line. A lot of people clap. Oh, my God, that's great. We don't need all these terrible credit card companies out there trying to take advantage of the American people. Good applause line. There's a couple numbers here for you. Americans currently, right now, have a record $1.14 trillion in credit card. That's trillion with a T. $1 trillion in credit card debt. The average interest rate on that debt is 21.5%. This is actually 6 points higher than before the pandemic. The average credit card balance is $6,300 in 2024. This is compared to $4,800 in 2021. The delinquency rate is 3%, which is the highest it's been since 2011. So what do all these numbers actually say? They're saying Americans have a lot of debt. The interest rate is 21%. It has gone up significantly post-pandemic. And the number of people not paying or being delinquent on their bills is the highest it has been in 13 years. So these numbers are not good. They really are. They're actually bad. We'll use the word bad. They are bad numbers. Why? How do we get this way? Well, basically, the National Bank Act, which was passed in the 19th century, allowed states to set credit limits and regulate banks. This is why any credit card you have, if you look into it, it's probably headquartered in either South Dakota, Delaware, or Utah, because the states regulate their banks, and the banks are what distribute the credit cards. So most of your banks that you have, South Dakota, Delaware, and Utah, because they have very relaxed banking laws. Other states, not so much. So it's a state-by-state issue, which typically is fine. Americans have a problem, though. And the problem is not that you have credit cards. The problem is not that credit card interest rates are high. The problems really become that Americans are financially illiterate. And I don't blame Americans. Finances, they're confusing. They're hard. But our problem is not so much that interest rates are high. Our problems stem from the economy overall doing poorly for the average American. Real wages have gone down in the last 4 years under Joe Biden. Inflation is up. But that is not where our credit card debt is attributing. It's housing. 35% of all the spending that households do right now is on housing. Housing costs are out of control. That is because of an overregulation by the government, and rent control, paradoxically, is a giant factor in the increased cost of housing. Because if you're in a rent-controlled unit, you feel great. You say, I got this unit, it's rent-controlled. How nice for me. Those units are fine. They're great for you. Congratulations on your deal. But what you've done is you have artificially capped the number of units that will be available in a place because people do not build in rent-controlled areas. We have seen this actually. We have a real-world example right now in Argentina. Javier Milei has implemented a number of libertarian economic policies that have turned the financial state of Argentina around. And one of them is housing. The big one is housing. He got rid of almost all of the regulation around housing and rent control, and now the cost of housing has plummeted in Argentina. And this is a good thing. When I say plummeted, it sounds bad, but it's a good thing because people now spend less on housing, and it's turning the economy around in that country. We could do that in the United States. It would be very easy to do, but the solution that people have tried to impose on high costs of housing is rent control. So they think they just need more rent control. It's foolish. It's misguided. But that is what they believe. And so our costs are not necessarily Americans' fault, though Americans are financially illiterate. It is this entire milieu that we are currently swimming in that is working against us in stacking capital. You have the housing crisis. You have inflation, which is not your fault. You have the housing, which is not your fault. These are the two biggest drivers of real-world loss in money. And you can't do anything about them. So it's not necessarily Americans' fault. But is it a good idea to combat this with more regulation? The answer is no. You need less regulation. You need to get rid of these housing regulations that are going to do it. Capping the interest rate of credit cards at 10%. What is that going to do? Well, we actually have another example of this. We capped fees in 2010 on banks. What happened? We capped how much banks could charge. It seems great. We did not get a reduction in debt. We have the highest debt ever. No, when we capped regulation, or when we put regulation on banks, we capped fees, we didn't get a reduction in debt. But what we did was we got an elimination of debit card rewards programs. So all those things that you used to do on your debit card, keep the change, the Save Act, the rounding up, all these little things that they had, they don't exist anymore. How many of you have a rewards program on your debit card today? Not very many. What do you think happens when we cap credit cards? One, the amount of people on the low income, low credit score end of the spectrum having the ability to get credit cards goes away. You're not going to get a credit card if you have terrible credit if they can only charge 10%. Because you're a bad investment. They don't want to give you a card. Also, how about those travel miles that you enjoy on your credit cards? What happens to those? Oh, well, those are gone. Your rewards programs on your credit cards? Well, how do you think they finance those rewards? They finance them through the fees that people pay, through the interest rates that people pay. That's how the entire business model is set up, because that's how credit card companies make money. Because credit card companies are a business. They're not a charity. You didn't go down to the Red Cross and get a bowl of soup and now they don't want their money. No. You went down and you signed a contract to borrow money, to pay back money, and they make money on the interest. So all these programs, these rewards programs on your credit cards, I think that those are going to go bye-bye. The solution is not to cap rates. The solution is to spend better. I listed off 30% is housing. But you know what went up like crazy? Coincidentally, at the same time, our debt started to spiral out of control and grow substantially. During the pandemic, things like entertainment and clothing, they rose in the 20 percentile each. The amount of spending that people did on entertainment, which is already a lot compared to other places in the world, went up 20%. It's come down. It's come down some, but it's still outrageous. Go to Investopedia. Just look it up. Do a quick Google search and look at the spending habits of Americans. You spend a lot on things that are important, but we also spend a lot on things that are not important. And then you get sucked into this trap and you have debt, and the debt spirals because you are not financially literate and you don't know how to take care of yourself. Again, not always people's fault. Sometimes you got to put a credit card on because whatever, you chipped a tooth and you needed to get it fixed, or you had to go to the emergency room because your appendix burst, or whatever. I get that. I'm not saying that's everybody. But what I'm saying is we can't just pretend that all of our credit card debt is based on this. The majority of it is actually not based on that. People live beyond their means, and they need to figure it out. How long have we been at this? What's our time check? 38. Okay. All right. I think we've ranted enough for the day. I think we're going to leave it there. As always, people, questions and comments. If you want to get on the show, question and comment below, and we always read a comment or take a question at the beginning of the show. And if we have more questions, we take more questions. It depends on the question. Sometimes I just read comments because I find them funny or I want to argue or whatever the case may be. And sometimes we have questions that are nice to answer. So, as always, questions are good. Comments, especially if they're funny, we like to read them on the show. And if you guys wouldn't mind giving this a like, a subscribe, a share, all the good stuff, you know what to do. And I will catch you guys next Friday.